Alarms tore through the command deck of the Voss raiding cruiser Halvin Spire as its sensors detected something that should not have existed. Captain TrembledHFY gripped the edge of his console, staring at a shape on the display that dwarfed every scale marker his instruments could offer. His crew had been sent on a simple mission, to probe the outer edge of human territory and test how quickly the small, scattered fleets of Earth would respond. It was supposed to be routine. It was supposed to be easy. Instead, the void ahead of them had opened like a curtain pulled back on a stage, revealing a structure so massive that his navigator dropped the control stick from her trembling hand. It was not a planet. It was not a moon. It was a warship, built by human hands, hanging silently in the dark, like a mountain that had learned to fly. Draymond had heard stories about human shipyards hidden beyond the charted lanes. Whispers passed between smugglers and rogue traders, who claimed to have seen lights where no lights should be. He had dismissed those stories as nonsense, the kind of tale spread by frightened crews trying to explain a bad sensor reading or a moment of panic in deep space. Now he understood that the stories had not even come close to the truth. His communications officer, a young Voss named Farron, tried to raise the mysterious vessel on every frequency they knew. There was no answer. The ship did not need to answer. Its size alone was a message that needed no words. Draymond ordered a slow retreat, hoping to gather data and return home with proof of what he had seen. But the moment his cruiser began to turn, lights ignited along the hull of the giant ship, thousands of them, blooming like a field of stars waking up all at once. Draymond felt his chest tighten. He had commanded ships in 3 border conflicts. He had faced pirate fleets and rival raiders. He had never felt fear like this, a fear that came not from danger itself but from the sheer impossibility of what stood before him. The giant ship did not fire. It did not need to. It simply moved, and the void around it seemed to bend under the weight of its presence. Draymond's cruiser, along with the 4 smaller vessels flying beside it, found their engines suddenly sluggish, as though some invisible hand had reached out and gripped the fabric of space itself. Warning lights flashed across every console. Power levels dropped. Communication systems flickered and died. In the space of a few heartbeats, the raiding fleet that had left Voss territory with confidence and swagger was rendered helpless, drifting in the dark like leaves caught in a sudden wind. Draymond watched through his viewport as the colossal vessel drew closer, its scale becoming even harder to comprehend the nearer it came. He could see now that it was not simply large. It was a marvel of engineering that defied everything the galaxy believed humans were capable of building. For generations, the older civilizations of the galaxy had looked upon humanity with a mixture of curiosity and mild disdain. Humans were newcomers, a species that had only recently discovered how to travel between stars. Their fleets were small. Their technology, while clever, was considered unremarkable compared to the ancient empires that had ruled the spaceways for thousands of years. Diplomats from established powers often spoke to human representatives with a polite but unmistakable condescension, the way an elder might speak to an eager but inexperienced apprentice. That perception was about to change forever, and TrembledHFY would be the first outsider to understand why. As his ship drifted, powerless, he saw shuttles depart from the colossal vessel, moving with a grace that suggested complete control over gravity and inertia. He braced himself for an attack, for weapons fire, for the kind of violent confrontation he had trained his entire career to survive. Instead, the shuttles simply extended tethers to secure his drifting cruiser, guiding it gently away from a collision course with a nearby asteroid field. It was almost as if the humans wanted to prove a point without causing harm, showing restraint even as they displayed unimaginable power. A voice crackled through his restored communication system, calm and measured. It belonged to a human woman who introduced herself as Captain Laura Bennett, commanding officer of the vessel, now looming over his crippled ship. She informed him, without any trace of anger or threat, that his fleet had drifted into a restricted zone and that they were being escorted to safety before their engines could be repaired. She spoke as though this were the most ordinary interaction in the galaxy, as though her ship's presence alone had not just shattered every assumption held about human capability. Draymond did not know how to respond. His pride told him to protest, to demand answers, to assert that his fleet had every right to be exploring that region of space. But his instincts told him something far more urgent. He needed to survive this encounter and carry word back to his empire, because what he had witnessed was not simply a powerful ship. It was a warning shot, fired without a single weapon being used. While Draymon's fleet drifted under human escort, deep within the colossal ship itself, the atmosphere was calm, almost quiet. This was by design. Admiral Daniel Ashford, the officer who had overseen the vessel's construction from its earliest days, walked through the command corridors with a steady pace, listening to reports from his officers. He had spent years preparing for this exact moment, the moment when the galaxy would finally see what humanity had built in secret. Daniel had never wanted a war. He believed, as many of his colleagues did, that peace was preferable to conflict, and that a strong defense could prevent violence rather than cause it. The ship beneath his feet, which the crew had nicknamed the Warden, was never meant to be an instrument of aggression. It was meant to be a shield so formidable that no empire would dare test humanity's resolve again. For years, human diplomats had endured dismissive treatment in galactic councils. Border disputes were settled unfairly. Trade agreements favored older species. Human ambassadors were seated at the far end of negotiation tables, their concerns addressed last, if addressed at all. It was not cruelty exactly, but a quiet, persistent underestimation that had worn down the patience of many within humanity's leadership. Daniel remembered the meetings where this project was first proposed, years earlier, in a secure chamber far from prying eyes. Scientists, engineers, and military strategists had gathered to discuss a bold idea, one that many believed was too ambitious to succeed. They wanted to build a vessel unlike anything the galaxy had seen, not simply larger than existing warships, but designed with entirely new principles of energy generation, structural integrity, and defensive shielding. It would take years of labor, resources gathered quietly from every human colony, and a level of secrecy that bordered on paranoia. The location chosen for construction was a system far from any trade route, surrounded by debris fields that made sensor scans unreliable and difficult. Workers were rotated carefully to avoid drawing attention. Communications were limited and heavily encrypted. Even within human territory, only a small circle of leaders knew the full scope of what was being built. It was, in every sense, humanity's most closely guarded secret. Now, after years of effort, sacrifice, and quiet determination, the secret was finally exposed, though not in the way anyone had planned. The Voss raiding fleet had simply chosen the wrong moment to explore uncharted space, and their unfortunate discovery would soon ripple across the entire galaxy. Daniel entered the observation deck, where his second-in-command, Captain Laura Bennett, stood watching the drifting Voss cruiser through the massive viewport. She turned to him with a thoughtful expression, the kind that suggested she understood the weight of what had just happened. He asked her whether the Voss crew had been treated well, and she confirmed that they had, adding that the young captain seemed more shaken by the sight of the ship than by anything else. Daniel nodded slowly. That reaction was, in some strange way, exactly what he had hoped for. Fear that came from awe, not from cruelty. Respect earned through demonstration, rather than demanded through threats. Word would spread quickly now. There was no way to keep the Warden hidden any longer. Within days, perhaps hours, rumors would travel through smuggler networks, trade routes, and diplomatic channels. Every empire in the region would soon know that humanity possessed a weapon capable of stopping an entire raiding fleet without firing a single shot. Daniel understood that this revelation would create fear, and fear could lead to unpredictable reactions. Some empires might seek alliance. Others might see the ship as a threat requiring immediate and drastic response. He had prepared contingency plans for both outcomes, but he also knew that no amount of planning could fully predict how a frightened galaxy might behave. As he stood on the observation deck, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the viewport, Daniel allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Humanity had come so far in such a short time, from a single fragile planet to a network of colonies scattered among the stars. Humans had proven remarkably adaptable, resourceful, and resilient. They had faced skepticism, condescension, and outright dismissal from older civilizations who could not imagine that such a young species could ever pose a meaningful challenge to their established order. That era of dismissal was ending now, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. Laura broke the silence, asking what their next move should be. Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. They would release the Voss fleet, allowing them to return home with their memories intact and their engines fully repaired. There was no need for hostility. The demonstration had already been made. Now it was time to let the galaxy react, to see which empires would approach with curiosity and diplomacy, and which would respond with fear and aggression. He gave the order, and within the hour, the Voss cruiser and its escort vessels were released from their tethers, engines restored to full function. TrembledHFY, still shaken but now deeply thoughtful, guided his fleet away from the colossal ship, casting one final glance back at the vessel that had changed his understanding of the galaxy forever. As his cruiser jumped into faster-than-light travel, carrying news that would soon reach every corner of Voss territory, Daniel Ashford stood on the Warden's observation deck, watching the empty space where the smaller fleet had been. He knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had just witnessed humanity's greatest secret, and nothing would ever be the same again. Somewhere far beyond the reach of human sensors, in council chambers and command centers scattered across a dozen different empires, reports were already beginning to arrive. Fragments of data and second-hand accounts describing a ship so large it seemed to defy the laws of physics. Disbelief would soon give way to concern, and concern would soon give way to something far more dangerous. But for now, in this quiet moment after the encounter, there was only silence, the vast and patient silence of space, holding its breath before the storm that was about to begin. Daniel turned away from the viewport and walked back toward the command center, his mind already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The galaxy had trembled at the sight of the Warden. Soon, it would have to decide how to respond, and humanity would be watching closely, ready for whatever came next. News of the encounter reached the Voss homeworld before TrembledHFY's cruiser had even completed its final jump. A garbled transmission, sent moments before his engines failed, had been picked up by a relay station and passed quietly up the chain of command. By the time Draymond stepped off his ship, exhausted and still shaken, he found himself summoned immediately to a private chamber deep within the Voss military headquarters, a place reserved for matters of the highest importance. General Korath Vale, commander of the Voss home fleet, listened without interruption as Draymond described what he had witnessed. The size of the vessel, the way it had disabled his ship without a single weapon being fired, the strange calm in the human captain's voice as she spoke to him, as though disabling an entire raiding fleet was nothing more than routine procedure. Korath's expression remained unreadable throughout the report, but his fingers tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the arm of his chair, a habit his officers knew meant he was thinking through something serious. When Draymond finished, Korath asked only one question. He wanted to know if the human ship had shown any sign of aggression, any indication that it intended harm. Draymond shook his head, admitting that the humans had actually rescued his fleet from drifting into a dangerous asteroid field. Korath's tapping stopped. He sat in silence for a long moment, before dismissing Draymond with instructions to remain available for further questioning. Once alone, Korath opened a secure channel to the Voss ruling council, a group of elder officials who had governed the empire for decades. He knew that what he was about to report would shake the foundation of everything they believed about the balance of power in their region of the galaxy. Humans had always been considered a minor concern, a species to be monitored, but never truly feared. That assumption was about to be tested. Meanwhile, fragments of sensor data from the encounter had already begun leaking beyond Voss borders. A freighter captain who had been passing through a nearby trade lane picked up distorted readings on his long-range scanners, readings that suggested something enormous had been present in that region of space. He sold the information, as freighter captains often did, to a broker who dealt in valuable intelligence. Within 2 days, that broker had sold the data 3 more times, each buyer belonging to a different empire, each empire eager to understand what had truly happened. By the end of the week, 5 separate governments had received some version of the story, though the details varied wildly depending on the source. Some reports described a ship the size of a small moon. Others claimed it was an entire mobile space station disguised as a warship. A few exaggerated accounts even suggested humanity had discovered some form of ancient alien technology and reverse-engineered it into a weapon beyond comprehension. The truth, though remarkable enough on its own, became tangled in a web of rumor and speculation. Ambassador Renata Olin, a skilled diplomat representing the Thessarian Council, one of the oldest and most influential governing bodies in the galaxy, received a briefing on the incident from her intelligence officers. She listened with growing unease, aware that the Thessarian Council had long treated human representatives with a dismissive attitude during trade negotiations and territorial disputes. If even half of what the reports suggested was true, that dismissive attitude might soon prove to be a serious miscalculation. Renata requested an emergency session with the Council elders, a request that was granted within hours given the seriousness of the intelligence she carried. She stood before the assembled leaders, some of whom had governed for centuries, and presented the fragmented evidence collected so far. Sensor readings, testimony from the freighter captain, second-hand accounts filtering through diplomatic channels from Voss territory. The elders reacted with a mixture of skepticism and alarm. One elder, a stern representative named Cassian Thorne, dismissed the reports outright, insisting that humans lacked the technological sophistication to construct anything of the scale being described. He argued that this was likely an elaborate hoax, perhaps designed by a rival empire to sow confusion and distrust among the galaxy's established powers. Other elders were less certain, pointing out that the consistency of details across multiple independent sources suggested something real had occurred. Renata proposed sending a diplomatic envoy to investigate the situation directly, requesting a formal audience with human leadership to clarify what had happened. The council debated this proposal for hours, weighing the risks of appearing weak or overly cautious against the dangers of ignoring a potential threat. Eventually, they agreed to send Renata herself, accompanied by a small escort, to establish contact with human authorities and gather first-hand information. While the Thessarian Council debated its response, other empires were taking more aggressive approaches. The Karn Empire, known throughout the galaxy for its militaristic culture and expansionist ambitions, received the same fragmented intelligence and reacted with immediate suspicion. Admiral Vexus Thorne, commander of the Karn Strike Fleet, argued forcefully before his own ruling council that any species capable of building such a vessel represented a direct threat to Karn territorial interests, regardless of whether that vessel had been used aggressively or not. Vexus had built his reputation on decisive, sometimes ruthless military strategy. He did not believe in waiting to see how a threat might develop before acting to neutralize it. His argument to the Karn Council was simple and forceful. If humanity possessed a weapon of this magnitude, waiting to understand their intentions was a luxury the Empire could not afford. Better to act quickly, to gather intelligence through direct reconnaissance, and to prepare contingency plans for confrontation if necessary. The Karn Ruling Council, composed largely of military leaders who shared Vexus's aggressive instincts, authorized a covert reconnaissance mission. A stealth vessel, equipped with the Empire's most advanced sensor-dampening technology, was dispatched toward the region of space where the Voss encounter had reportedly occurred. Its mission was simple: locate the human vessel, gather as much data as possible without being detected, and return with intelligence that could inform the Empire's next move. Back within human territory, Admiral Daniel Ashford received reports of increased activity across multiple Empire communication networks. Human intelligence services, though smaller and less established than those of older civilizations, had spent years developing subtle methods of monitoring galactic chatter. The sudden surge in encrypted transmissions between various governments suggested that word of the Warden's existence was spreading faster than anticipated. Daniel called a meeting with his senior officers and select members of human leadership, including diplomat Henry Caldwell, a seasoned negotiator who had represented humanity in countless galactic councils over the years. Henry had grown accustomed to the subtle insults and dismissive treatment that came with representing a young species among ancient civilizations. He listened intently as Daniel explained the situation, his expression shifting from concern to something resembling cautious optimism. Henry pointed out that this moment, while dangerous, also presented an opportunity. For years, human diplomats had struggled to secure fair treatment in negotiations, constantly having to prove their worth to skeptical counterparts. Now, with the Warden's existence confirmed, empires that had once ignored human concerns would be forced to take them seriously. The challenge would be managing this newfound respect carefully, ensuring it translated into genuine partnership rather than escalating fear and hostility. Daniel agreed, though he remained cautious about how quickly the situation could shift from respect to conflict. He ordered increased security measures around the Warden's location, along with heightened readiness across humanity's smaller defensive fleets stationed throughout colonized systems. If any empire decided that aggression was preferable to negotiation, humanity needed to be prepared to respond, though Daniel hoped fervently that such a response would never be necessary. Grace Sutton, the intelligence officer responsible for monitoring galactic communications, delivered a troubling update during the meeting. Her analysts had detected unusual fleet movements originating from Karn territory, patterns consistent with the deployment of a reconnaissance vessel. She could not confirm its exact destination, but the timing strongly suggested it was connected to the recent encounter. Daniel weighed this information carefully. A reconnaissance mission was concerning but not necessarily hostile. It suggested caution and information gathering rather than immediate aggression. Still, he understood the Karn Empire's reputation well enough to know that their military leadership tended to favor decisive action over prolonged diplomacy. If their reconnaissance mission confirmed the Warden's capabilities, there was a real possibility that Karn leadership would push for a more direct confrontation. He ordered the Warden's defensive systems placed on heightened alert, along with instructions to avoid any unnecessary displays of aggression that might be misinterpreted as provocation. The goal remained the same as it had always been: to demonstrate strength sufficient to discourage conflict, without ever initiating hostilities that could spiral into a wider, more destructive confrontation. 3 days later, the Karn stealth vessel arrived at the edge of the debris field surrounding the Warden's location, its advanced sensor dampening technology allowing it to approach undetected by conventional means. Its commander, a disciplined officer named Captain Ilvar Kessin, ordered his crew to begin passive scanning, gathering as much data as possible, while avoiding any active sensor emissions that might reveal their presence. What Ilvar's sensors detected exceeded even the most exaggerated rumors his empire had received. The Warden's true scale became apparent through careful long-range analysis, its structural design revealing engineering principles that seemed to defy conventional understanding of warship construction. Ilvar recorded everything meticulously, aware that this data would prove invaluable to his empire's military strategists. However, human sensor technology, though not as advanced as some older civilizations in certain areas, had been specifically designed with detecting stealth incursions in mind. This was a lesson humanity had learned early in its history among the stars, a defensive necessity born from repeated encounters with more technologically advanced species who often underestimated human ingenuity. Grace Sutton's monitoring systems detected subtle anomalies in the debris field, inconsistencies that suggested the presence of a cloaked vessel. She alerted Daniel immediately, and within minutes, the Warden's defensive systems locked onto Ilvar's stealth ship, revealing its position despite its advanced cloaking technology. Ilvar's crew panicked as their sensors detected active targeting systems suddenly focused on their vessel, a clear indication that their presence had been discovered. Rather than opening fire, Daniel ordered a direct communication channel open to the Karn vessel. Ilvar, recognizing that further concealment was pointless, accepted the transmission with a mixture of apprehension and professional curiosity. Daniel's voice came through calm and measured, informing the Karn captain that his presence had been detected, and that continued reconnaissance would not be tolerated, though no hostile action would be taken as long as the vessel withdrew peacefully. Ilvar, torn between his duty to gather intelligence and the very real danger of remaining in a compromised position, made the decision to comply. He ordered his vessel to withdraw, transmitting a final burst of gathered data back to Karn territory, before disengaging his cloaking systems and departing the region entirely. The mission had been partially successful, providing valuable intelligence, but it had also confirmed something deeply unsettling to Karn military leadership. Humanity's defensive capabilities extended beyond the Warden itself, encompassing detection systems sophisticated enough to identify even their most advanced stealth technology. When Ilvar's report reached Admiral Vexus Thorn, the reaction within Karn military command was immediate and severe. Vexus argued even more forcefully than before that decisive action was necessary, insisting that humanity's combination of overwhelming firepower and sophisticated detection capability represented an unprecedented threat to Karn territorial security. Other voices within the council urged caution, pointing out that provoking a species capable of such technological achievement without fully understanding their intentions could lead to catastrophic consequences. The debate within Karn leadership remained unresolved, but the tone had shifted decisively toward viewing humanity as a serious and immediate concern. Similar debates were occurring simultaneously across multiple empires, as fragmented intelligence continued to spread, and various governments struggled to formulate coherent responses to a threat they were only beginning to understand. Ambassador Renata Olin, meanwhile, continued her journey toward human territory, accompanied by a small diplomatic escort. She carried with her the hopes of the Thessarian Council, tasked with determining whether humanity's newfound power represented an opportunity for genuine partnership or a threat requiring careful containment. As her vessel approached the outer edges of human-controlled space, she found herself reflecting on decades of dismissive treatment her people had shown toward human representatives, wondering now whether that treatment had been a grave miscalculation. Her escort vessel was intercepted by a small human patrol ship long before reaching any significant human colony, a routine security measure that had become considerably more vigilant in recent days. The patrol ship's commander, a young but capable officer named Nathan Cole, requested identification and purpose of visit through standard diplomatic channels. Renata transmitted her credentials, along with a formal request for audience with human leadership regarding recent events. Nathan relayed the request up the chain of command, and within hours, authorization was granted for Renata's escort to proceed toward a designated meeting point, though under careful human supervision. This marked the beginning of what would become one of the most consequential diplomatic exchanges in recent galactic history, as the Thessarian Council sought to understand exactly what kind of power had emerged from humanity's quiet, determined efforts, and what that power might mean for the future of every civilization in the region. As Renata's vessel proceeded deeper into human territory, escorted carefully by Nathan's patrol ship, she could not shake the feeling that she was witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in galactic power, one that would reshape alliances, rivalries, and the very structure of interstellar politics for generations to come. Behind her, the debates continued in council chambers across a dozen different empires, each government grappling with the same unsettling question: how should they respond to a species they had underestimated for far too long? Ambassador Renata Olin stepped off her transport onto a small human outpost station, the first Thessarian official ever to set foot on human soil under such extraordinary circumstances. She had expected to be met with cautious hospitality, perhaps even a hint of nervous pride from a species suddenly thrust into galactic prominence. Instead, she found herself greeted by diplomat Henry Caldwell, whose calm professionalism and measured courtesy reminded her that humans, despite their newfound power, had not abandoned the diplomatic instincts that had helped them survive among far older and more established civilizations. Henry escorted Renata through the station toward a private conference room, making polite conversation along the way, careful to avoid discussing the warden directly until the formal meeting began. Renata studied him closely, searching for any sign of arrogance or triumph that might have crept into human demeanor following their sudden shift in status. She found none. If anything, Henry seemed almost weighed down by the seriousness of the situation, as though he understood better than most the dangers that came with such overwhelming power falling into any single species' hands. Inside the conference room, Admiral Daniel Ashford waited alongside Captain Laura Bennett and Grace Sutton. Renata took her seat across from them, her diplomatic training helping her maintain a composed exterior despite the historic weight of the moment. For decades, meetings between Thessarian officials and human representatives had followed a predictable pattern, with humans seeking favorable terms and Thessarian delegates granting only minor concessions, always maintaining the upper hand in any negotiation. This meeting felt entirely different, though neither side had yet acknowledged it directly. Renata opened the discussion by requesting clarification regarding the vessel that had been detected near Voss territory. Daniel responded honestly, confirming the ship's existence and providing a general overview of its purpose, emphasizing that it had been constructed purely as a defensive measure, born from decades of frustration over unfair treatment in galactic affairs. He explained that humanity had grown weary of having its territorial boundaries tested, its trade agreements manipulated, and its diplomatic voice consistently marginalized in councils dominated by older, more established powers. Renata listened carefully, recognizing genuine frustration in Daniel's words rather than aggressive posturing. She asked directly whether humanity intended to use the vessel for expansion or conquest, a question that carried significant weight given the history of powerful species using new technology to dominate weaker neighbors. Daniel answered without hesitation, stating firmly that the Warden existed solely to protect human territory and interests, not to threaten or invade the territory of others. He acknowledged, however, that trust could not be built on words alone, especially given the scale of power humanity now possessed. He proposed a framework for ongoing transparency, suggesting that human leadership would welcome regular diplomatic exchanges with the Thessarian Council and other interested parties, allowing for open dialogue regarding humanity's defensive capabilities and intentions moving forward. Renata found herself genuinely surprised by this offer. Older civilizations rarely extended such transparency to one another, let alone to a species they had long considered inferior. She recognized this as a significant gesture of good faith, though she remained cautious, aware that not every empire in the galaxy would respond to humanity's newfound power with the same measured approach the Thessarian Council was attempting to take. She informed Daniel of the aggressive stance being adopted by certain factions within the Karn Empire, sharing intelligence her own government had gathered regarding Admiral Vexus Thorn's calls for immediate and decisive action against humanity. Daniel's expression grew serious as he absorbed this information, though he showed no outward sign of panic. He had anticipated that some empires would react with hostility rather than curiosity, and he had prepared accordingly. The conversation shifted toward broader implications, with Renata expressing concern that humanity's sudden shift in power could destabilize the delicate balance that had maintained relative peace across the galaxy for generations. Daniel acknowledged this concern, admitting that he shared similar worries. He explained that human leadership had debated extensively how to manage this transition, weighing the risks of revealing the Warden's existence too suddenly against the strategic necessity of eventually demonstrating their defensive capabilities. He shared with Renata a proposal that had been discussed among human leadership, an idea to establish a formal galactic council specifically focused on managing emerging technological developments among all species, ensuring that no single empire, human or otherwise, could use overwhelming power to dominate or threaten others without facing coordinated diplomatic and economic consequences. Renata considered this proposal thoughtfully, recognizing both its potential value and the significant challenges involved in convincing multiple, often rival empires to cooperate on such a sensitive matter. While the negotiations continued within human territory, tensions were escalating rapidly within Karn military command. Admiral Vexus Thorn had grown increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as excessive caution among his fellow council members. He argued passionately that every moment spent debating was a moment humanity used to further strengthen its position, potentially constructing additional vessels of similar scale, or developing countermeasures against any future Karn military action. His arguments eventually found enough support among hardline council members to authorize a more direct approach. Rather than another covert reconnaissance mission, Vexus proposed sending a formal delegation to human territory, ostensibly for diplomatic purposes, but secretly tasked with gathering additional intelligence and assessing potential vulnerabilities in human defensive systems. The Council approved this plan cautiously, insisting that any aggressive action remain strictly prohibited, unless explicitly authorized through proper channels. Vexus assembled a delegation led by a skilled Karn diplomat named Cassian Vor, a man known for his sharp intellect and subtle manipulation tactics during negotiations. Cassian was briefed extensively on his true objectives before departing for human territory, understanding that his diplomatic mission served as a convenient cover for gathering crucial intelligence that could inform future Karn military strategy. Cassian's delegation arrived at the same human outpost station where Renata's negotiations were still ongoing, creating an unexpected and delicate situation as two separate diplomatic missions from different empires found themselves navigating human territory simultaneously. Henry Caldwell, coordinating logistics for both delegations, quickly recognized the potential for complications arising from this overlap and adjusted meeting schedules carefully to avoid unnecessary friction between the two groups. Cassian requested a private audience with human leadership, presenting himself as a genuine diplomatic envoy seeking to establish peaceful relations following the recent revelations regarding the Warden. Daniel, aware through Grace Sutton's intelligence gathering of the more aggressive factions within Karn leadership, approached the meeting with appropriate caution, though he maintained the same measured professionalism he had extended to Renata's delegation. During the meeting, Cassian asked numerous questions regarding the Warden's technical specifications, framing his inquiries as necessary for establishing appropriate diplomatic protocols and ensuring mutual understanding between the two civilizations. Daniel provided general information, careful to avoid revealing specific details that could compromise the vessel's strategic advantages, while still demonstrating a reasonable degree of transparency consistent with the diplomatic approach he had established with the Thessarian Council. Grace Sutton, monitoring the meeting closely through discreet observation, noticed subtle inconsistencies in Cassian's line of questioning that suggested his true objectives extended beyond simple diplomatic curiosity. She flagged these concerns to Daniel following the meeting, and together they agreed to proceed with increased vigilance regarding the Karn delegation's activities during their stay on the outpost station. That evening, one member of Cassian's delegation, a junior officer named Torv Kesson, attempted to access restricted areas of the outpost station under the guise of requesting additional accommodations. Human security personnel, trained to remain alert for exactly this kind of probing behavior, intercepted Torv before he could reach any sensitive areas, politely but firmly redirecting him back to the designated diplomatic quarters. This incident, though relatively minor, confirmed Daniel's suspicions regarding the true nature of the Karn delegation's mission. He convened an emergency meeting with his senior staff, along with Henry Caldwell, to discuss how best to handle the increasingly complicated diplomatic situation. Laura Bennett suggested confronting Cassian directly, presenting the security breach as evidence of bad faith, and demanding honest disclosure of the delegation's true objectives. Henry cautioned against this approach, arguing that direct confrontation could escalate tensions unnecessarily, potentially playing into the hands of hardline factions within Karn leadership who were already advocating for aggressive action against humanity. He proposed instead a more measured response, addressing the security incident through official diplomatic channels while continuing to extend cautious goodwill toward the Karn delegation, effectively demonstrating human restraint and maturity, even in the face of provocation. Daniel ultimately agreed with Henry's approach, recognizing that how humanity handled this delicate situation could significantly influence how other empires perceived their character moving forward. He arranged a private meeting with Cassian the following morning, addressing the security incident calmly but firmly, making clear that while human leadership valued diplomatic relations with the Karn Empire, any further attempts to breach restricted areas would result in immediate termination of the delegation's diplomatic mission. Cassian, recognizing that his cover had been at least partially compromised, offered a carefully worded apology, attributing the incident to a misunderstanding regarding station protocols. Daniel accepted the explanation graciously, though both men understood the underlying tension that remained unresolved beneath the surface of polite diplomatic exchange. As negotiations continued over subsequent days, Renata Allen and Cassian Vor found themselves occasionally crossing paths within the outpost station's common areas, each representing very different approaches to managing the emergence of human power. Renata, genuinely seeking to understand humanity's intentions and explore potential avenues for cooperative partnership, contrasted sharply with Cassian, whose diplomatic mission remained fundamentally rooted in gathering intelligence for potential future conflict. During one such encounter, Renata engaged Cassian in conversation, subtly probing his true impressions of the situation. Cassian, ever the skilled diplomat, deflected her questions with practiced ease, though Renata sensed an underlying tension in his responses that suggested Karn leadership harbored far more aggressive intentions than their official diplomatic statements indicated. She made a mental note to include this observation in her report back to the Thessarian Council, recognizing the potential for serious conflict if Karn hardliners eventually gained enough influence to authorize direct military action against humanity. Meanwhile, word of both diplomatic delegations visiting human territory had spread further throughout the galaxy, prompting additional empires to consider their own approach to the rapidly evolving situation. The Zenthar Collective, a smaller but technologically sophisticated confederation of allied worlds, dispatched their own diplomatic envoy, a thoughtful and analytical representative named Elian Marsh, tasked with independently assessing the situation and reporting back recommendations for how the collective should proceed. Elian's arrival added yet another layer of complexity to the increasingly crowded diplomatic landscape unfolding within human territory. Unlike Cassian's thinly veiled intelligence-gathering mission, or Renata's genuine attempt at establishing cooperative relations, Elian approached his assignment with a scholarly curiosity, seeking primarily to understand the technological and social factors that had allowed humanity to achieve such a remarkable engineering feat in relative secrecy. Daniel found himself increasingly occupied managing multiple diplomatic relationships simultaneously, each requiring a slightly different approach based on the distinct motivations and concerns of the respective empires involved. He relied heavily on Henry Caldwell's diplomatic expertise, along with Grace Sutton's continued intelligence monitoring, to navigate this complex web of galactic politics while maintaining humanity's core objective of establishing peaceful, mutually respectful relationships without compromising their hard-won defensive advantages. As the days passed, a tentative pattern began to emerge among the various responses to humanity's revelation. The Thessarian Council, represented by Renata, appeared genuinely inclined toward cooperative partnership, recognizing the potential benefits of aligning with a newly powerful ally, rather than risking confrontation. The Zenthar Collective, represented by Elian, adopted a cautiously observant stance, gathering information before committing to any particular diplomatic strategy. The Karn Empire, however, remained deeply divided internally, with aggressive factions, led by Admiral Vexus Thorn, continuing to push for more assertive action, even as their official diplomatic delegation maintained a facade of peaceful intent. Daniel understood that this delicate balance could shift dramatically, based on how effectively humanity managed the coming weeks and months. A single misstep, whether through diplomatic miscalculation or an unforeseen security incident, could easily push cautious observers toward more aggressive stances, potentially uniting previously divided factions across multiple empires against humanity's newfound power. He called a private meeting with Laura Bennett and Grace Sutton late one evening, reflecting on the immense responsibility now resting on humanity's shoulders. The Warden had been designed as a shield, a means of ensuring humanity's survival and independence in a galaxy that had long underestimated their potential. Yet now, that same shield had inadvertently thrust humanity into a position of significant influence over the broader balance of galactic power, a role they had never sought, but now had to navigate carefully. Laura expressed confidence in humanity's ability to manage this new responsibility, pointing to the measured, thoughtful approach Daniel had taken throughout the unfolding crisis. Grace, ever practical, cautioned that continued vigilance remained essential, particularly regarding the unresolved tensions with Karn hardliners, who showed no signs of abandoning their aggressive posture, despite ongoing diplomatic engagement. Daniel nodded, acknowledging both perspectives. He understood that the coming days would prove critical in determining whether humanity's demonstration of strength would ultimately lead to a new era of respectful cooperation among galactic powers, or whether it would instead ignite tensions that could spiral into the very conflict humanity had hoped to avoid through the Warden's construction in the first place. As he dismissed the meeting and prepared for another long day of delicate diplomatic maneuvering, he could not shake the feeling that the galaxy stood at a genuine crossroads, one that would be shaped significantly by decisions made within the walls of this small, increasingly significant outpost station. Admiral Vexus Thorn stood before the full Karn ruling council, his patience finally exhausted after weeks of what he considered dangerous inaction. He argued that Cassian Vor's diplomatic mission had confirmed everything he needed to know. Humanity possessed a vessel of overwhelming power, and every day spent in careful negotiation was another day for them to strengthen their position further. He demanded immediate authorization to mobilize a strike fleet, insisting that a swift, decisive show of force could neutralize the threat before humanity had the opportunity to build additional vessels or forge alliances that might make future confrontation impossible. The council chamber fell into heated debate, with several elder members expressing deep reservations about provoking a species capable of such technological achievement. One counselor, an aging strategist named Orwin Kess, reminded Vexus that the Warden had disabled an entire Voss raiding fleet without firing a single weapon, and that humanity's restraint during that encounter, along with their handling of the security incident involving Cassian's delegation, suggested a level of discipline and control that should not be dismissed lightly. Vexus countered forcefully, arguing that restraint shown during isolated incidents did not guarantee peaceful intentions moving forward, and that waiting for definitive proof of hostility would only ensure that Karn forces faced an even more insurmountable disadvantage when conflict eventually became unavoidable. His impassioned argument, combined with growing anxiety among council members who feared losing their empire's standing in the shifting balance of galactic power, eventually swayed enough votes to authorize a limited military demonstration, though not the full-scale assault Vexus had originally proposed. The Council's compromise authorized Vexus to lead a fleet toward the border of human territory, conducting what was officially termed a defensive readiness exercise, but which everyone understood to be a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate humanity into revealing additional information about their capabilities, or potentially provoke a response that could justify further escalation. Vexus accepted this compromise with visible frustration, though he recognized it as more support than he had expected to receive. Word of the Karn fleet's mobilization reached human intelligence networks within hours, thanks in part to Grace Sutton's extensive monitoring efforts, and a network of informants she had carefully cultivated across various trade routes and communication relays. She brought the news immediately to Daniel Ashford, along with detailed analysis suggesting the fleet's likely trajectory and estimated time of arrival near human border systems. Daniel convened an emergency council with his senior officers, along with Henry Caldwell, to determine the appropriate response. Laura Bennett advocated for a strong defensive posture, positioning the warden prominently near the border to discourage any further escalation from Karn forces. Henry cautioned that such a move, while potentially effective as a deterrent, could also be perceived as an aggressive counter-provocation, potentially giving Vexus and his hardline supporters within Karn leadership the justification they needed to push for full-scale conflict. After careful deliberation, Daniel decided on a middle path. Rather than deploying the warden directly to the border, he would position it at a strategic distance, ready to respond quickly if necessary, while sending a smaller diplomatic and defensive fleet to formally acknowledge the Karn fleet's presence and request clarification regarding their intentions. This approach demonstrated preparedness without appearing overtly aggressive, maintaining the careful balance humanity had worked hard to establish throughout the unfolding crisis. Captain Laura Bennett was given command of this smaller response fleet, tasked with the delicate mission of engaging directly with Vexus Thorn's forces, while avoiding any actions that could be misinterpreted as hostile. She assembled a capable crew, including a skilled young pilot named Emma Whitfield, whose exceptional flying abilities had earned her a reputation as one of the finest pilots in humanity's growing fleet. As Laura's fleet approached the border region, sensors detected the full scale of Vexus Thorn's mobilized forces, a formidable armada of Karn warships arranged in an intimidating defensive formation. Laura ordered her fleet to maintain a respectful distance, opening formal communication channels to request a meeting with the Karn fleet commander. Vexus, somewhat surprised by the measured, professional tone of the human response, rather than the aggressive posturing he had half expected, agreed to a formal meeting between fleet commanders. Laura and Vexus exchanged tense but professionally conducted communications, each carefully probing the other's true intentions while maintaining strict diplomatic protocol. Laura explained that human forces had detected the Karn fleet's movement toward the border and sought clarification regarding the purpose of what appeared to be a significant military mobilization. Vexus, following the official narrative approved by his council, described the deployment as a routine defensive readiness exercise, unrelated to recent diplomatic tensions. Laura, aware through intelligence briefings that this explanation was almost certainly a diplomatic fiction, nonetheless responded with measured professionalism, acknowledging his statement, while reiterating humanity's continued commitment to peaceful relations and mutual respect between their respective territories. The tense standoff continued for several days, with both fleets maintaining careful distance while diplomatic communications continued between Laura and Vexus, as well as through official channels connecting Daniel Ashford directly with Karn leadership. During this period, Emma Whitfield and other pilots within Laura's fleet conducted regular patrol maneuvers along the border, careful to avoid any actions that could be misconstrued as provocative, while maintaining vigilant awareness of Karn fleet movements. On the fourth day of the standoff, an unexpected complication arose. A small group of Karn scout ships, operating under Vexus's authorization but without full council approval, attempted to probe deeper into human territory under the cover of a sensor malfunction excuse, testing how quickly and effectively human forces would respond to a potential border incursion. Emma Whitfield, patrolling nearby, detected the scout ships immediately and intercepted them before they could advance significantly beyond the established border. Rather than engaging aggressively, Emma maintained a defensive posture, communicating clearly with the scout ship commanders that they had entered restricted territory and requesting their immediate withdrawal. The scout ships, caught in their unauthorized probe, complied quickly, retreating back across the border without further incident. Emma reported the encounter immediately to Laura, who in turn relayed the information to Daniel and, through official diplomatic channels, formally addressed the incident with Vexus directly. Vexus, genuinely unaware that his subordinates had taken such liberties beyond his explicit authorization, found himself in an awkward position, forced to acknowledge the incident while distancing himself from full responsibility for the unauthorized action. This incident, though resolved without violence, added significant strain to the already tense standoff, further complicating efforts to de-escalate the situation peacefully. Daniel, recognizing that the situation risks spiraling out of control despite everyone's best intentions, made the difficult decision to personally travel to the border region aboard a secure diplomatic vessel, seeking a direct, high-level meeting with Vexus Thorn to address growing tensions before they escalated further. Henry Caldwell accompanied him, along with a small security detail, understanding the significant risk involved in such a direct approach, but recognizing the necessity of decisive action to prevent further escalation. The meeting between Daniel Ashford and Vexus Thorn took place aboard a neutral diplomatic platform positioned precisely at the midpoint between human and Karn fleet positions, a symbolic gesture intended to demonstrate mutual respect and shared responsibility for finding a peaceful resolution. Both leaders arrived with minimal escort, a calculated risk designed to signal genuine commitment to de-escalation rather than continued posturing. Daniel opened the conversation directly, acknowledging the tension that had developed over recent weeks, while expressing genuine desire to avoid conflict that would benefit neither civilization. Vexus, though initially guarded, found himself somewhat disarmed by Daniel's straightforward honesty, a stark contrast to the calculated diplomatic maneuvering he had grown accustomed to throughout his career. The two leaders engaged in a lengthy, candid discussion, addressing underlying fears and concerns driving the current crisis. Vexus admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that his primary motivation stemmed from genuine concern regarding the long-term implications of allowing any single species to possess overwhelming technological advantage without appropriate checks or oversight. Daniel acknowledged the validity of this concern, sharing his own proposal for establishing a broader galactic council focused on managing emerging technological developments collaboratively among multiple empires, rather than allowing unilateral advantages to destabilize existing power structures. Vexus considered this proposal carefully, recognizing its potential to address underlying anxieties driving much of the current tension, not just within Karn leadership, but likely among other empires grappling with similar concerns following the Warden's revelation. He agreed to bring this proposal back to his ruling council, along with a formal recommendation to stand down the mobilized fleet in favor of continued diplomatic engagement, provided humanity demonstrated genuine commitment to the collaborative oversight framework Daniel had outlined. The negotiations between Daniel and Vexus marked a significant turning point in the unfolding crisis, though neither leader was naive enough to believe that all tension had been fully resolved. Deep-seated anxieties regarding humanity's sudden shift in power would take considerable time and continued diplomatic effort to fully address. However, the immediate threat of armed conflict had been meaningfully reduced, providing crucial breathing room for broader diplomatic efforts to continue developing. As Daniel returned to human territory following the successful negotiation, he reflected on how close the situation had come to spiraling into open conflict, despite the careful, measured approach humanity had maintained throughout the crisis. He understood that maintaining peace moving forward would require sustained diplomatic effort, continued transparency where appropriate, and unwavering commitment to the collaborative framework he had proposed to Vexus, and, through him, to the broader Karn leadership. Meanwhile, news of the successful de-escalation spread quickly throughout the galaxy, reaching the Thessarian Council through Renata Olin's ongoing communications, as well as reaching the Zenthar Collective through Elian Marsh's continued observations. Both parties viewed the peaceful resolution as a positive sign, further reinforcing the perception that humanity, despite their newfound power, remained genuinely committed to peaceful, cooperative relations rather than aggressive expansion or domination. Vexus Thorn returned to his ruling council with a formal recommendation to stand down the mobilized fleet, presenting Daniel's proposal for collaborative technological oversight as a viable path forward that addressed core security concerns without necessitating armed conflict. Though some hardline council members remained skeptical, the majority recognized the wisdom of avoiding unnecessary confrontation with a species that had demonstrated both overwhelming capability and genuine restraint throughout the crisis. The Karn Council ultimately voted to stand down the fleet, formally accepting an invitation to participate in preliminary discussions regarding the proposed Galactic Oversight Framework. This decision marked a crucial de-escalation of what had been the most dangerous moment since the Warden's initial revelation, though everyone involved understood that establishing lasting peace and trust would require continued effort and vigilance moving forward. Daniel Ashford, upon receiving confirmation of the Karn Council's decision, allowed himself a rare moment of genuine relief. The crisis had been successfully navigated without descending into the violent confrontation that had seemed increasingly likely just days earlier. Yet he remained acutely aware that this represented merely one chapter in a much longer, more complex process of establishing humanity's place within the broader galactic community, a process that would require continued wisdom, patience, and careful diplomatic navigation in the months and years ahead. 6 months after the tense standoff at the border, delegates from a dozen different empires gathered aboard a newly constructed neutral space station, a project built through the combined resources of multiple governments, specifically to host the first formal session of what would come to be known as the Galactic Technological Oversight Council. The station itself stood as a symbol of the changed political landscape, a physical representation of cooperation born from the crisis that humanity's revelation had triggered. Admiral Daniel Ashford walked through the station's central corridor toward the main assembly chamber, accompanied by Henry Caldwell and Laura Bennett. He noted the presence of delegates from the Thessarian Council, led by Renata Olin, who greeted him with a warm nod of recognition, their working relationship having grown considerably over the preceding months through numerous productive negotiations. He also spotted the Karn delegation, led not by Vexus Thorn directly, but by a more moderate representative, though Vexus himself remained present as a military advisor, watching the proceedings with cautious but genuine interest. The assembly chamber itself had been designed with careful attention to diplomatic symbolism, featuring a circular seating arrangement that ensured no single delegation occupied a position of visual dominance over others. This design choice, proposed jointly by human and Thessarian architects during the station's construction, reflected the underlying principle driving the entire oversight initiative, that no single power should hold unchecked dominance over the collective security and stability of the galaxy. As delegates settled into their designated seats, Daniel took his place among the human delegation, glancing briefly at Grace Sutton, who had been instrumental in providing the intelligence analysis that helped shape humanity's diplomatic strategy throughout the crisis. She offered him a small, encouraging smile, understanding better than most just how precarious the path to this moment had truly been. The session opened with a formal address from Renata Olin, who had been selected by consensus among the various delegations to serve as the inaugural chairperson of the new council. She spoke eloquently about the unprecedented circumstances that had brought them all together, acknowledging the genuine fear and uncertainty that had gripped the galaxy following the Warden's revelation, while emphasizing the remarkable opportunity that had emerged from successfully navigating that crisis without descending into destructive conflict. She outlined the Council's core mission, establishing a framework through which any empire developing technology capable of significantly altering the balance of galactic power would be required to engage in transparent dialogue with fellow council members, allowing for collaborative assessment of potential risks and benefits before such technology could be fully deployed. This framework, while not without significant challenges in implementation, represented a genuine attempt to prevent future crises similar to the one humanity's secret project had inadvertently triggered. Daniel was invited to address the assembly, and he approached the podium with a mixture of gratitude and lingering caution. He spoke candidly about humanity's original motivations for constructing the Warden, born from years of feeling marginalized and dismissed within galactic affairs, a defensive measure intended to ensure their survival and independence, rather than a tool for domination or conquest. He acknowledged, however, that the secrecy surrounding the project, while understandable given humanity's circumstances at the time, had also contributed significantly to the fear and instability that followed its eventual revelation. He expressed genuine commitment to the transparency principles embodied in the new Oversight Council, pledging humanity's full cooperation in ensuring that future technological developments, whether originating from human territory or elsewhere, would be managed collaboratively rather than unilaterally. His address was met with a mixture of reactions among the assembled delegates. Some, like Renata and the broader Thessarian delegation, responded with genuine warmth and optimism, viewing Daniel's words as a sincere commitment to the collaborative future they hoped to build. Others remained more reserved, their trust in humanity's intentions still tempered by lingering uncertainty regarding the true extent of the Warden's capabilities and what other secrets might remain hidden within human territory. Vexus Thorn, watching from among the Karn delegation, found himself reflecting on the significant journey that had brought them to this moment. He recalled his own initial certainty that decisive military action represented the only viable response to humanity's sudden rise in power, a certainty that had been genuinely challenged through his direct negotiations with Daniel during the tense border standoff. While he remained a firm believer in maintaining strong defensive capabilities, he had come to appreciate the value of diplomatic engagement and collaborative oversight as tools for managing complex interstellar security challenges. As the session progressed, delegates engaged in detailed discussions regarding the specific mechanisms through which the Oversight Council would operate, debating issues ranging from information-sharing protocols to procedures for addressing potential violations of the collaborative framework. Elian Marsh, representing the Zenthar Collective, contributed thoughtful analysis throughout these discussions, drawing on his earlier observations during his time studying humanity's diplomatic approach in the aftermath of the initial crisis. The negotiations proved complex and occasionally contentious, reflecting the genuine difficulty of establishing trust and cooperative frameworks among civilizations with vastly different cultural values, historical grievances, and competing strategic interests. Yet throughout these challenging discussions, a consistent thread of cautious optimism persisted, driven largely by the shared recognition that the alternative, a galaxy fractured by fear and unchecked technological competition, represented a far more dangerous path forward. During a break in proceedings, Daniel found himself in conversation with Renata Allen, reflecting on the remarkable transformation in their relationship since her initial visit to human territory following the Warden's revelation. She admitted candidly that her original mission had been driven substantially by fear and uncertainty, a genuine concern that humanity's newfound power might herald a period of aggressive expansion or domination, similar to patterns witnessed among other civilizations throughout galactic history. She expressed genuine appreciation for the measured, thoughtful approach humanity had consistently demonstrated throughout the crisis, noting that this consistent restraint had played a crucial role in convincing many previously skeptical delegates to engage constructively with the collaborative oversight framework now taking shape. Daniel acknowledged that maintaining this restraint had not always been easy, particularly during the tense border standoff with Karn forces, but he remained firmly convinced that the long-term benefits of demonstrated trustworthiness far outweighed any short-term strategic advantages that might have come from a more aggressive posture. As the formal session concluded for the day, delegates dispersed to informal gathering areas throughout the station, continuing discussions in more relaxed settings that allowed for genuine relationship building beyond the formal diplomatic protocols governing official proceedings. Emma Whitfield, who had accompanied the human delegation as part of the security detail, found herself engaged in friendly conversation with several junior officers from various other delegations, exchanging stories about their respective experiences navigating the unprecedented challenges of recent months. Laura Bennett, observing these informal interactions with quiet satisfaction, reflected on how far humanity had come since that fateful encounter with Draymond Kesh's raiding fleet nearly a year earlier. What had begun as a moment of profound uncertainty and potential crisis, had gradually transformed into an opportunity for humanity to establish itself, not merely as a powerful military force to be feared, but as a genuine partner capable of contributing meaningfully to galactic stability and cooperative security. Later that evening, as the station's artificial lighting dimmed to simulate a peaceful night cycle, Daniel found himself alone in a quiet observation lounge, gazing out at the vast expanse of stars, stretching endlessly beyond the station's protective viewport. He thought back to the early days of the Warden's construction, the countless sleepless nights spent worrying whether humanity's ambitious secret project would ultimately prove to be their salvation or their downfall. He thought of TrembledHFY, whose accidental discovery had set this entire chain of events into motion, wondering how the young Voss captain's life had changed following his unexpected role in galactic history. He thought of Vexus Thorn, whose initial hostility had gradually given way to cautious respect and genuine collaborative engagement. He thought of Renata Allen, whose diplomatic skill and genuine goodwill had played such a crucial role in helping navigate humanity through this unprecedented period of transition. Grace Sutton joined him in the observation lounge, settling quietly into a nearby seat without immediately speaking, understanding the reflective mood that had settled over her longtime colleague and friend. After a comfortable silence, she finally spoke, asking whether he believed the collaborative framework they had worked so hard to establish would truly hold, given the countless historical examples throughout galactic history of similar cooperative efforts eventually collapsing under the weight of renewed rivalry and mistrust. Daniel considered her question carefully before responding. He acknowledged that no framework, however well designed, could completely eliminate the fundamental challenges inherent in managing relationships between diverse civilizations with different values, priorities, and historical experiences. However, he expressed genuine hope that the shared experience of navigating this recent crisis together, of standing at the very edge of potentially catastrophic conflict, and choosing instead to pursue diplomatic resolution, had created a meaningful foundation of trust and mutual understanding that could sustain continued cooperation moving forward. He acknowledged that humanity's role in the galaxy had fundamentally changed, no longer the marginalized newcomer easily dismissed in diplomatic negotiations, but now a significant power whose actions and decisions carried weight and consequence across multiple civilizations. This new status brought with it substantial responsibility, a responsibility he felt humanity was prepared to embrace, having learned valuable lessons throughout this challenging period about the importance of transparency, restraint, and genuine commitment to peaceful cooperation, even when possessing overwhelming strategic advantage. Grace nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the wisdom in his perspective, while also understanding that maintaining this delicate balance would require continued vigilance and effort in the years ahead. She reminded him gently that their work, despite the significant progress achieved through the establishment of the Oversight Council, remained far from complete. New challenges would inevitably arise, requiring the same careful, measured approach that had successfully guided humanity through this initial crisis. Daniel agreed, acknowledging that the journey ahead would undoubtedly present new obstacles and unforeseen complications. Yet he found himself genuinely optimistic about humanity's ability to navigate these future challenges, drawing confidence from the remarkable resilience, ingenuity, and diplomatic skill that had characterized their response to this unprecedented crisis from its very beginning. As their conversation drew to a close, Daniel rose from his seat, offering Grace a warm smile, before turning back toward the observation window, taking one final moment to appreciate the vast, star-filled expanse before him. The galaxy that had once viewed humanity with dismissive condescension now regarded them with a complex mixture of respect, caution, and cautious hope for continued cooperation. It was, Daniel reflected, precisely the outcome he had hoped for when the Warden's construction first began all those years ago, not merely a demonstration of overwhelming power, but a catalyst for genuine, lasting change in how civilizations across the galaxy chose to relate to one another. The following morning, as delegates reconvened for the second day of formal proceedings, a palpable sense of cautious optimism permeated the assembly chamber. The collaborative framework, though still requiring extensive additional negotiation and refinement, had established a solid foundation upon which genuine cooperative security could potentially be built. Humanity, once dismissed as an insignificant newcomer among the galaxy's ancient civilizations, now stood as a respected participant in shaping the future direction of interstellar relations, their journey from obscurity to prominence serving as a powerful reminder that even the most established balance of power could shift dramatically when a determined civilization chose to invest in both strength and wisdom in equal measure. As the session progressed into its detailed discussions regarding implementation timelines and mutual verification procedures, Daniel Ashford allowed himself, for the first time in many months, a genuine sense of hope for the future. The galaxy had trembled at the sight of humanity's colossal battleship, but through careful diplomacy, unwavering restraint, and genuine commitment to peaceful cooperation, that initial fear had gradually transformed into something far more valuable and enduring, a foundation for lasting partnership among the diverse civilizations that called this vast, star-filled galaxy their shared home.